Greetings from sunny Helsinki, here from Finland. My name is Pylkkanen, and I would like to start by thanking you for having me here. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to share some of our observations and experiences and ongoing development work with you today. Now, it is always a bit nerve-wracking to speaking English, but I hope to manage. Please bear with me. And I hope that you will use the chat function to write down and share your thoughts. And I believe I have some colleagues here with me as well, so they will be able to clarify things if something is left unclear. So please don't hesitate to ask. And so firstly, let me tell you a little bit about my background. I work as the head of development at Takuusäätiö, or Guarantee Foundation, here in Finland. And as our CEO, Juha, was here last month, I believe he gave you a more comprehensive glance at the work we do, so I won't go too deep into that. But as a brief summary, we are a non-governmental organization, and we are mostly known for providing debt advice by phone and chat, both of which are nationwide and free of charge, and for granting guarantees for restructuring or consolidation loans. So people can combine their debts into a single loan from their bank. And last year, we received some 1,500 applications and granted around 300 guarantees. And around 7,000 people received advice on our debt helpline and in our chat. And in Finland, there are also the statutory services of financial and debt counseling as well. So that is another place where people can receive debt advice and also help with applying for debt adjustments from district courts once they have exhausted all other possible means to resolve their situation. And today I will also give you an example of one of their ongoing pilot projects. And so today I focus on people with gambling debts. And during the past few years, we have noticed that there has been an increasing number of applicants for our loan guarantee that show excessive gambling on their bank statements. For example, we receive more and more applications from young people, from people under their 30s, and over 20% of this applicant group shows excessive gambling. And we have also noticed that from all the people that contact us on the debt helpline and in our chat, whenever gambling comes up during the conversation, those people have on average 10,000 euros more accumulated debts than other clients, and a total of about 40,000 euros. And this is one of the reasons we have also started a new development project this year to better understand this phenomenon. And we have partnered up with the Finnish SOSPED Foundation that trains experts by experience and also offers a wide range of peer support for people who have experienced problematic gambling of their own or by a loved one. And I will be telling something about that as well. So I will lay some background first, because I think this topic is heavily influenced by national characteristics. And so when we talk about gambling in Finland, it might come as a bit of surprise that us Finns, we actually rank 4th among the world's biggest gamblers per capita. And we spend nearly 2 billion euros every year on these various games of chance. And according to a 2015 report by our National Institute for Health and Welfare, Us Finns actually wager the most in Europe. And 80% of the population gambles in some form every year, and over 40% of the adult population gambles weekly. And it has been estimated that around 3% of Finns have a gambling problem, and around 11% are at risk of developing one. So these are, of course, alarming numbers. And now there has been a state monopoly on gambling in Finland for over 70 years. And gambling is regulated by the Finnish Lotteries Act. And we have a state-owned company, Veikkaus, that runs the gambling operations. And the state monopoly has been considered the best way to reduce the negative effects of gambling and to prevent misuse. And a part of the strong legitimacy of the system here has been based on profit sharing, as the gambling profits have been used to fund common good activities such as sports, art, youth work, or work done for the promotion of health and social well-being, and so on. And we too at Guarantee Foundation have been funded with gambling profits. But from next year on, the profits are being transferred to the state budget, and this somewhat ambiguous direct link between gamblers and beneficiaries will be broken. And there has been a lot of discussion here about opening the market of online games for a license-based system, because already around half of online gambling already happens outside this legal and state-regulated market, and this, of course, has resulted in reduced returns. Now, we Finns, we lose an average of 500 euros per adult per year in these games, but actually spending on gambling is very concentrated on a very small group of high-intensity gamblers. And problem gamblers here have been found to have lower annual incomes compared to moderate gamblers. But what we witness at Guarantee Foundation is that gamblers with better income, they unfortunately have the opportunity to accumulate unreasonable amounts of debts due to the easy availability of consumer credit here in Finland. And so we have slowly started to understand that the financial harms of gambling, and especially the burdening debts that follow, are really long-lasting and complex. And we feel we need to find new ways to promote financial literacy as a part of harm prevention and reduction as well. And this has even been noted in our national policy program. So this is a very a recent topic that is discussed a lot here in Finland as well. So as I mentioned, what we often see is that gamblers have often fallen into these debt spirals and have often accumulated a lot of debt, and often over a very short period of time. And once they realize they can no longer control the situation, they turn to us for help with solving this debt crisis or this debt situation. And they usually hope for a quick and easy solution and are naturally disappointed when the situation cannot be instantly fixed. And now we, of course, try to offer some written feedback and advice about their options and the consequences, what would happen if they would change their habits if there is no chance for a debt arrangement at the moment. And we, of course, urge them to look for professional help when necessary. But one big problem is that we don't really know what happens to these applicants if we reject them on the basis of excessive gambling, because they don't really respond to our feedback surveys. And our fear is that they keep on carrying the same way, which can then lead to desperate measures, fraud or misappropriation of family money, etc., and things like that, which only complicates the situation further. And from the peer groups of Sospet Foundation, we have learned that people put off looking for help because there is such a strong stigma attached to problem gambling. So people try to manage independently for as long as they possibly can. And there is a lot of shame and hopelessness that unfortunately can even lead to suicidal thoughts or actions. And they tell us that even when they have turned to treatment professionals for help, they report to have been told to just quit gambling, which they feel is actually not an option because they feel the primary problem is the gambling debt, and quitting would actually mean giving up hope for that big win or that jackpot that could solve everything. So people end up feeling that even when they do look for help, they don't get the help they feel they need. And we also get a lot of contacts from family members of gamblers or other loved ones that have either tried to help financially or have been forced to do so. And we feel this experience of financial abuse should be addressed more widely, and awareness should be raised concerning this phenomenon as well, so that it's not only the gamblers themselves, but their loved ones that suffer. And actually, statistically in Finland, around 800,000 Finns are negatively affected by the gambling of a loved one. And that's around 15% of the population. So it's a very large group. And so when we talk about actually taking care of the gambling debt, in Finland we have a so-called, or so to speak, division of labor between services, that the treatment and support services, they focus on gaming control and to some degree everyday money management, whereas possibilities for debt restructuring are evaluated in these debt advice services. And this is a problem because we recognize that people might actually need both services simultaneously at the same time, but this has not been the case earlier. And a lot of times what happens is that when people hit the wall financially, when they can no longer manage with their debts, but no arrangements can be made because the situation is still in a crisis, debt advice services tell them to return later, and then they go to these treatment services, and then they feel they go back and forth from one service to another, and they don't really get their debt problem addressed. And usually it takes years to be able to enter into some sort of debt arrangement. And usually the debts have to go to enforcement first, and people's wages get garnished in order to pay back even some part of the debt. But this people often feel they are a bit left alone. They are told to deal with the gambling problem, to seek help for that, but they feel like they are very left alone and they don't really get help with the financial issues and with the debt problems. So what we feel is that even though the possibility of debt restructuring or these different arrangements might be a long way down the road, it is still important that people get genuine advice and correct information, because maintaining motivation is key here to let people know that there are options once they have gained control over the harmful gambling habits, and once they have received control again over their everyday finances. But those things need to happen first. And we have heard from the peer groups that, for example, the possibility of getting our loan guarantee at some point in the future is actually really significant for their motivation to remain without gambling. And another thing we had been thinking quite a lot about is that we have the scientific evidence that people who have gambled a lot have actually trained their brains to expect for immediate rewards and this fast-paced pleasure, and therefore it can be very hard for them to actually make long-term plans or think about far in the future. And I believe this is an aspect we really have to take into consideration in debt advice as well, and understand that it's hard for people to picture solutions that happen within a longer range of time. So the information about different options need to be dealt with regularly and repeatedly. And so when people apply for our guarantee for a consolidation loan, what we need to assess is their situation and try to figure out whether the timing could be right, or whether there is some underlying cause for getting into debt in the first place that the person tried to solve by turning into gambling, whether there is some underlying more significant cause. And of course, whether the client has the right kind of support he might need at the moment. And gambling is a really wicked phenomenon, since relapses are common, and there might be crime-based debt that forms a barrier basis for some types of debt arrangements. And I believe in Finland we sort of lack a common understanding of whether a person can actually be held fully responsible for his debt situation if it is indeed caused by an addiction. So a lot of individual consideration is involved, and this of course can put people in quite unequal situations. And for example, there have been cases in district court where a judge has ruled that a person has been reckless or indifferent in his actions of accumulating debt when the reason behind those debts have been problematic gambling. And I believe this somehow shows how the nature of functional addiction is more foreign to us than, for example, substance abuse, because other types of addictions are often seen as these mitigating circumstance. And at Guarantee Foundation, when we look at our applicants, we usually require some proof that harmful gambling habits are under control due to this addictive nature of gambling, but we do not require full abstinence either. And I believe this is quite tricky in Finland because the gambling is so widespread, so common, and so widely accepted that it is hard for us to tell when it turns problematic. And this is something we have to consider with each applicant. And moreover, when we talk about debt advice for gamblers, we feel we need to have a more comprehensive approach. And we have actually just started to use the term financial recovery, which refers to more than just getting rid of the debt problem. And I believe this is the part of the recovery from problematic gambling that lays the foundation for debt arrangements in the future, as opposed to the crisis situation where gamblers turn to us and where they think the arrangements should happen. Now, financial recovery is a term used in some scientific literature, but it is more of a qualitative concept than an actual established term. But it has to do with 3 dimensions. And first is having financial security and stability, of making ends meet and coping financially day in and day out. And the second dimension is starting the process of mapping out the gambling debt. The situation is often blurred, and people are not aware of their total situation. And it can also feel like a nightmare, like a bad reminder from the past once they feel they want to move forward. And finally, it has to do with finding ways to cope with the financial scarcity when the money is tight because the process of paying off all the gambling debts starts. And what the experts by experience from SOSPED Foundation have told they hope from us is that they need us to make them feel that even with all the debts, they can live a decent life, and make sure they understand that they need to work on more than just paying off the debt, that they need to actually come face to face with their thoughts and attitudes towards money, and they need concrete help with learning again to manage their finances, because the gambling has had such a profound impact on the way they handle money. And what we tried to do in this project is we tried to look at this and search for ways to achieve this. And we believe this may be achieved. A person feels in control of his finances, can incorporate meaningful things in his life, despite all the financial scarcity, and feels that he can actually affect the outcome of his recovery with his own actions and truly understand his options. And we see these different peer groups play a very significant part in financial recovery, because people share these common everyday tips to one another, and they support each other through these very turbulent times. And they also get to see and hear about encouraging examples of how others have managed to get rid of their debts later on. And we have been asked if we could maybe develop some materials for them, for their groups, some sort of self-help material. And I believe this is sort of like something we haven't really thought about earlier, or felt like this should be where the people need the support as well. And I believe here in the stories of these recovering gamblers, I believe here lies some of the wisdom and understanding that we need to somehow harness and incorporate into our services to better help them in their situation. And last but not least, I will introduce two new approaches from Finland to help people with a gambling debt. And the first one is the so-called game treatment path. This is directly from Finnish, so it might sound a bit funny. But this is a pilot experiment and a qualitative research at the same time. And the initiative came from the workers themselves. And in this pilot, in the area, one area of Finland, the clients of problem gambling treatment services are offered the opportunity for a joint meeting with a treatment professional and a debt counselor from the financial and debt services. And so this is all very new because, as I mentioned earlier, these services have been highly separated in the past, and they have concentrated on their different kind of expertise on their sites. But with this new model, the client receives answers and information on both debt and financial matters, as well as the treatment or gaming control. And he gets the opportunity to discuss his situation from several perspectives and get a better understanding about the order in which things should be taken care of. And of course, at the same time, these two experts get to share information and get to learn from one another. And another idea is that the client receives important information early on, but also it is easier for him to return later once the timing is better for debt restructuring because there is already a familiar debt counselor to turn to. And I think this pilot is a great example of making our public services more customer friendly and taking into account the specific needs of gamblers. And so far, this pilot has only been conducted in one area in Finland and with only one co-working couple of professionals. But the National Institute for Health and Welfare has been conducting interviews during this pilot, and they will evaluate the results later this year. And hopefully this model will spread because they have told that preliminary experiences are very encouraging. And finally, our new partner project with Sospet Foundation that I mentioned about, Rahat pelissä in Finnish. We have called it Gambling with Balance in English. This project hopes to dive into the world of experience and into all these observations I have shared with you today, and to better our understanding about how we could offer better support and tools to facilitate financial recovery. So far, we have conducted interviews and have actually been struck with how much resilience and inventiveness people have with managing their finances. And I believe that earlier we have tended to focus solely on the gambling debt and resolving that issue, when I believe the actual issue is that people have no idea how to use money or how to control it in their everyday life, or even know what to feel about money anymore once it is no longer recycled through game. And all this needs to be addressed before we can go deeply into the debt advice. And I hope that all this information we will receive from these experts by experience will hopefully present us with new insight into preventing gambling-related financial harms before they start to escalate as well. Because we have been told about the difficulties of letting go of a standard of living that has been actually built on lies, because the money was never there in the first place, but gambling made it seem like it was possible. So we need to somehow understand these underlying thoughts and wishes that people have. And our project team has actually already concluded that there should be a period of so-called financial rehabilitation once people start to seek help with their financial trouble, because we feel this notion of financial recovery is very useful, but it is somehow quite passive and might mean that people are left alone to wait for some distant opportunity for debt arrangements in the future. Whereas we try to find in this project new ways to support people at this stage and strengthen their advocacy and create hope and visualize those milestones on the way to surviving the gambling debts as well. And so during this 3-year project, we are planning, for example, to build an online course and supplement it with peer support. And we will also develop a digital tool for monitoring finances and develop material that can be used individually or in a peer group or with a professional. But we are very excited to be co-developing these materials with people who have actually suffered gambling-related financial harm and are now willing to help others. And of course, we wish to raise awareness about the role of money in gambling and maybe change the way we treat people with gambling debt here in Finland. So this concludes my presentation. I think my time has been spent as well. So I would like to wish to thank you for your attention. And here is my email address. And please don't hesitate to contact me if you wish to discuss this theme further. We would love to exchange ideas